I started out by just dowsing in and around Brunner Castle. And I started tracking and trying to map all these small lines, 12 pace wide and 15 and 12 and 15 generally. And then you sent me on that mission one day, and that was the first time I'd ever found a 25. And I'm like, remember I sent you a text, how 25? Wow. You said, no, you're looking for something bigger. I'm like, what? And I found a 90 pace wide line. Well, so then we went to I can never say it, JH, and found the church there, the Templar church there, with some lines running through it, and started trying to follow that Templar line, as we designated it. Now, I kind of naively thought at the time that because I'd seen the work that was done with that line, the Mary and Michael thing, I'd watched the video and the documentary, I'd read the book. And it seemed quite straightforward that they were just following this line through England, yeah. And I thought that this would be what I would be doing. No, the more I get out there, and the more I do it, the more lines I find, and the more complicated the picture becomes. So it's like two steps forward, one step backwards all the time. Because when I go out in the first place, I usually go out in the car. And I'll drive. I find if I drive at less than about 60 kilometers an hour with a stick, I can find some of the lines pretty easily, actually. Then I'll park the car, jump out, do all my measuring and mapping, plot it in the system, and move on. And that way you're jumping across the country and you think you're following the same line. And then you go out and you plan, we'd plan like a walk, a 20-kilometer hike that would kind of follow that line. Then you'd realize that actually there was another line going this way and you were following a different line to the one you first thought. So it becomes really, it becomes a life's work and an obsession. And I find now that everywhere I go, I take one of my sticks. And, I've just moved into this apartment, my own apartment, about 6-7 months ago. And I knew it was on a small line because I'd dowsed outside the apartment. But I'd never taken my rods to walk the dog out back and down to the drain and along the countryside, which I do every day, twice a day, until Sunday. And on Sunday, I took my rods, and within 20 meters of the house, what do I find? A pair of 90 pace white lines. And I'm like, excuse me, Gary, how the hell can this be? So now I've got so many lines to map and work out that I think I'll be occupied for the rest of my natural life. But what I want to do is I want to stick to the Templar line as much as I can and get that sorted as best I can before moving on to others. But sometimes when you've got half an hour to spare and you're thinking, oh, I'd like to get out and do a bit of dowsing, it's easy just to go to the nearest one and add a bit of length to that one instead of going to the Templar line.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going through so many things I found as well when I started, and if we come back to when Hamish did the Michael and Mary line, of course he started just by mapping the Michael line.
Yeah.
And until he got to Avebury when he realized there was a pair, and then he had to go back and start again. And it tells a story a little bit that if you have a sensitivity and awareness to a particular frequency, that's what you pick up.
Yeah.
But as soon as your awareness grows of the other frequencies, then you're in that boat of having to distinguish between what you're picking up.
Yes.
And the more lines with the more different frequencies, you're going to be sensitive to all of them. And the question that you ask is not show me the edge of the line or anything. It's like you have to say, don't show me any of these damn bands in the middle. Don't show me anything else. Just show me this one, So it's like you have to distinguish through your intense focus just to pick up the one you want, because it's the only way to differentiate between them. And of course, the other problem, and this really set me back 18 months of work, was just completely gone because I'd made so many mistakes, was the type 3 lines. They were taking me on all over the place, and it wasn't straight like at all. And it wasn't until I realized, and it was a slow realization, that the 8 to 10 pace wide lines, they were at that time, but the type 3 lines, they come into harmony every 8 to 10 days. And when they come in harmony, the frequency is exactly the same. So you could be following a line here on a harmony time with them, and then suddenly another line coming in and crossing it.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not careful, you're walking around a building, you pick up what you think's the same line, but it isn't. It's one crossing it.
Yeah, I've done that.
I had to go back every single one of my bends on my map. I had to go back there, and when it wasn't a harmony time, and I realized, this is a different line. They're just crossing.
No, I've done that, and in fact, we talked about it. I showed you, and you said, "Oh, these lines, they look like they should be straight, not bending like this." So I thought, "Oh, he's wrong. I know for a fact it bends." I thought, "How do I prove it?" So I picked one of my buddies, and I said, "Mark, can you meet me for lunch? And we're just going to jump in the car, and we're just going to go to a churchyard down the road." And he said, "Yeah, no problem." So we went. And I gave him the rods, and I said, "Just walk around the church, just empty your mind, just think of nothing, and just walk around the church and see what happens." So he was picking up lines. I'm like, "Okay, this is going to work." Except he picked up 2 more than I did. Oh no, Rory's right.
I've been there. It's happened to me. Yes. This lovely computer chap. I said I'd teach him to dowse, and he would teach me to use Dreamweaver, a website, and he took me to I knew there was a Type 3 line running through this nearby church, and I proudly said, "Look, I dowse this." He found it, and then he walked around the church. He said, "What's this?" I thought, bloody hell, it's another one, but it wasn't the same size,
Yeah.
And we followed this one, and he went right back through the front of his house. Of course, he was really attuned to it without knowing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I've really learned, is that you have to be exposed to a line to get tuned into it. And once you, like with the Templar line, we're so tuned in that quite often we don't need to dowse at all. We're just driving. Oh, it's here. And Eva has this uncanny ability to be walking along. And I see her pull out a stick, and she looks at me to see if I've registered it, but she's more sensitive than I am. And I said, what made you, it just felt like a nice, beautiful place, and there should be a line here. And so, it's and being able to drive and dowse, she cannot drive and dowse. I can. I don't know why, but she can't do it. And I've had other friends who I've taken out with the rods, and they're all excited because the rod's spinning around, but actually it's just they're walking, they're not holding the rods properly, and they don't get they don't find anything at all, nothing, so it seems very much that you have to somehow find a way to tune in to what you're looking for, and often that happens accidentally. On the other hand, how is it that when we do these hikes, we find these other lines? Because we're not tuned into them, but because we're because we're walking slower, and I've got my rod out the whole time, quite often we do find these other lines.
Well, of course, Jung has a short statement. He tells us that he learned from the characters that he met. He said, "We are tools of the numinous." And the numinous are all the beings and the higher powers that are trying to seed us with information. So it's entirely possible, I'm sure you will mention, that you are gifted insights or visual symbols, or something will happen that will make you pick up something. That awareness will click you in. Even when you meditate, you might get something, and then you'll be thrown out of your aware state back into your consciousness because you've just been given something. So walking and finding a line you weren't expecting to is probably them trying to get your attention.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting journey, and of course along the way you make all kinds of observations and put 2 and 2 together, mostly making 4, but not always. And I know that you've experienced the same thing, because I think you wrote a book about it. But you start to see things like, well, hang on a minute. Every time we come across one of the pairs in a 90 pace wide line, and it is negative according to what it tells us, or let's say that I pick it up before Eva does, which is always a good test because she picks up the positive before I do. And so we use that quite regularly to check and validate what we're doing. But they always seem to pass through natural springs. They always seem to find the crosses on the side of the road that have been put there. They seem to have an affinity for feminine type symbols. And then on the other hand, the ones that seem to suggest to me they're positive, they tend to always have, they tend to pick the high ground, or they seem to pick the high ground, the ridge, as opposed to the valley. I mean, these are not always true, but it seems that there are observations that you start to make that have a pattern.
They're fairly useful guidelines, and I have to say that you are really quite fortunate to be over there in Czechia, because it does sound to me, from what I'm watching your videos, is that you're finding it that not a lot has been changed. When you come to our country in the UK, more populations, more people, more emotions. There's a much greater disturbance. You know, you'll find lines aren't running through churches or graveyards or springs because they've been moved, or they've moved on themselves. So you've almost got a brand new slate. You've gone back to how they were, because they weren't messed with so much.
Yeah.
So and that's also really helpful, because you're right that there one does seem to follow the wells, and one does seem to follow the mountaintop. But Hamish, I think, found that out first. But when you're looking for alignments on a large scale, you can use those landmarks as possible places for where they may go.
Yeah.
So at least it narrows down your search.
Yeah.
And that can save you a lot of time.
Well, the other thing is, and I think made this clear through some of the videos as well, is we've come across this typical node where you get to it and it's either a church or has been a church, and it's on the top of a hill. It's dedicated to Mary. There's the Stations of the Cross. There's a spring at the bottom. And this pattern now is repeated so many times. I mean, 5, 6, 7 times, that it's uncanny. You know, there's almost a perfect correlation between that sort of a place and a node of some significance, it seems to me.
Well, I think originally these locations were where the people who were adept at connecting with these energies would gather, and the very process of making a connection, a conscious connection, would draw the lines into the node to where you are. There's a node that several hundred people now meditate on down in Knowlton Henge in Dorset. A lovely old circular henge, in a ditch on the inside, and then an old ruin in the middle. But inside, originally there was a stone circle there. And when we first found the node there, and we had to sort of repair it, and Adrian, who I was with, and Joe at the time, it was sort of a sort of temporary node that we'd set up, because well, I won't go into the reasons there, but they then held a large meditation there about a month or two later. I think it was at the solstice for them, and they didn't have it at that node. They did it in a different sort of place. And when I came the next time, which was a few months ago now, I expected to find the node where we'd left it, and it actually moved about 10 meters or something, 15 meters to where they'd been gathered, without them knowing. So these lines are drawn to what we do if we're doing the right thing.
That's interesting, because I read a book, Way of Weird. I don't know if you've come across it. It's a novel, but it's
I have it next door. Yes.
Yeah. And that, when I read the book and when I think about it, these lines seem to me to be the kind of lines that he was hinting at with the shaman in the book. And so I think it's like a weird web, you know, that it's somehow our life, fate, whatever it is, seems to be intertwined with these lines. And once you start engaging with the lines, I think we talked about this last time. I mean, I've followed lines through Brno and rediscovered places that were very important to me a decade ago. And I'm like, my God, I didn't realize it. the line goes through this. I used to spend all my time here. And then you start thinking, well, hang on, why is the line so personal? I know that Eva for a while was worried because everywhere we found Perun line, just the other side of Brno here, had seemed to have some kind of relationship with her family. And, what does it mean? What does it mean? I said, I don't know, just accept it, move on.
Well, Gary Biltcliffe and Caroline Hoare, who mapped the Bolinas line that runs up through Isle of Wight, and they tracked it down through France, and they write in their book, well, they clearly showed there was a conscious connection with a family or a series of families that lived in places along these lines. So that there's a connection with the shore, with human consciousness over time as well. And I have friends who also found really key points in their life arranged in a sort of linear way, even to the point where they were at school or they got married and now they're living. So something draws us to these places, and for me, there's some kind of conscious connection that's made, and when you're at the nodes, then that potential to reach into maybe even getting closer to the universal consciousness for meditation, that seems to be why people would go to these places.
Yeah, there seems to be a historical family associated with this Templar line as well, because when you start digging into the history around the time of the Templars, there was a certain, well, actually, it's Jindřichův Hradec is Jindřich's castle, and it's his family. And everywhere we go and find a node on this line, almost not 100%, but almost all the time, we find some association with some member of his family in about the 13th century. So it seems that this line is associated with that family somehow. And even their symbols, which is a petaled flower, can be seen at some of these sites. Yeah. So yeah, it's very strange. And the other thing that we've discovered, talking about, since the last time, is how to use the rods more effectively. So sometimes you know that the line should be somewhere in a certain area, but it doesn't. You don't find it where you would expect it, and so you start thinking, well, where could it be? What I've discovered is if I just take one rod and say, okay, please show me where the Templar line is, it will point in a direction. And then if I take both rods and say, okay, is it less than 100 meters away, less than half a kilometer away, I can actually get an azimuth and a distance. And almost every single time it's spot on, or it seems to be spot on. Hopefully I'm not fooling myself, but you can use the rods to find the lines, not just by walking through them, but having them direct you to where the line is.
Yeah, what you're doing now is what I tell all the beginners not to do, because it's too much. It's too advanced. I mean, yes, you can. It's just that it's absolutely that you can use it that way. But goodness, no, the beginners try. Oh, I can show. No, don't. You learn the trade. Do that work. So you've obviously built up that connection with it, and all of that makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I can even sit in the car and say, okay, I can't find you. Where are you? Point me in a direction, and I follow. I try to move in that direction, and sure enough, I find it. And of course, the other one that we just laugh at all the time is where you go to some location, either because there's a church there or there's something of significance, like a restaurant that someone likes and goes to all the time, or perhaps it's just a place where you think the line should be passing through somewhere in that vicinity. I park my car, we get out, and we discover we parked the car in the line.
If I told anybody that, they wouldn't believe me. But
it happens all the time. I'm like, Jesus, we parked in the line. How did we manage this?
Because we're tools of the numinous. They're having a laugh with us. They have a laugh with us.
So I know that you're interested and keen and working with lots of people around trying to build a bigger picture of all these nodes and things. So how is that project going, and how can people help?
Well, it's starting fairly well in a sense that I've not got any expectations with how quickly it should grow. It'll grow in its own way. And thank you for bringing it up. We call it the Sacred Network. You can get there at Sacred Network, sacrednetwork.org. And at the moment, there's a couple of hundred sites up in Europe and America, and a few in Australia and New Zealand. There's more sites to go up, but the main fundamental thing is for me is for people to get to these places, to meditate on them, and to let the energies there guide them, a bit like we're being guided through how we're being learning when we go to these sites. We're being drawn to certain places. The energies will lead you to what you need to learn to do, or to help manifest what you need. So how do I measure how well we're doing? Well, I've got groups in New Zealand who are meeting, and they're going to sites there. We've got others who are now looking for new sites in certain areas of that country. We've got 2 or 3 groups in Australia, 2 of them having now very strong groups of 10, 12 people each at nodes actually just on the beaches. One of the slight problems we have in some countries is having private land and public land, and there's just not a lot of public land free. And so and a lot of old places in Australia are very overgrown, so we found several mounds which were obviously sacred sites which are just too overgrown. But there are groups forming in Australia, which is great. 2 or 3 groups in Spain, 2 or 3 in France, 10 to 12 groups that I know of in the UK, and another 10 to 15 groups in America who are meeting in 2s and 3s and 8s, and it's a start. What can I say? And we're training as many people as we can in the dowsing courses, and I've got to step that up a bit more, because we need to teach people how to look after sites and to check on them. But it's a process of learning ourselves. What we actually have to do at these sites is lost knowledge. And it's quite clear that 12,000 years ago, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
I imagine that the Templars that built your sites and other sites in Europe, they probably had people among them that would understand these better than we do today. So
if people are interested in learning how to dowse, if they're in the UK, they can find that information from your website as well, or?
Yeah, I run dowsing courses there on the events page, so they're not up at the moment, but I will be launching. I did about I think I did about 14 days throughout last year of teaching people. It's a whole day. It's tough. It's intense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been blessed with lovely people coming to do this, and then they all go back to where they live. A lovely chap called Richard, who's now mapping sites in and around Japan. He's living over there, and he finds them going through Shinto shrines, and he's learning from that. There's others. There's a couple, 2 ladies that came from Newfoundland, and they're now they've also tracking the lines and nodes over there. So a few from France, they're over there now working with their areas, and lots of people from the UK and some from Ireland and from Scotland. And I hear back from them how they're getting on, and sometimes I can direct them if I know the area a bit, and that helps them to go and find the lines in that area. It's growing. I think that's the interesting thing. People are interested now in pursuing where these nodes are, because they're getting the picture that something's changing in this world. There's an awakening going on. There's an increasing energy, as you know, the lines, the widths are increasing. The intensity of the energy is increasing, and it's almost switching people on. Goodness, I must find somewhere where I must be, I need to be in nature. I need to know where I am, and they're looking for something local, which is terrific. So yeah, some places are further on than others.
Yeah, well,
And it's a strange one because there's a process of going with the flow, and we must all work to that. And I try and just follow synchronicity and then explore that and see what happens, because
mm,
we can easily consciously go off the path of what we should be doing. It just the whole mindset of, you know, your background in business and geology as well. You'll know how everything is easily, you're able to set goals and carry them out, and just because you can doesn't mean to say you should, you know. But if you're following that, going with that flow, everything seems to sort of happen, and you don't get all these blockages. And as soon as you do go too far ahead, you know, life has a way of slowing you down suddenly. So
true.
yeah.
Yeah, I also have written a lot of blog articles about how frustrating it is that you find something that has a spiritual aspect to it and you get tuned in, and yet somehow at some point something will happen that, so 6 months after, you're thinking, wait a minute, why did I stop meditating every day? Or, you know, wait a minute, why did I stop dowsing? And life just seems to have this problem, this ability to shift your focus through you know, what you think is material or physical necessity. And it's happened to me so many times that I often just laugh and think, well, you know, before you get an ego about how good you are at all this magical stuff, just think how many times you've easily been pushed off the path and gone for a 5-year circular and realized you ended up where you started again. You know, I mean, it is interesting how life can be sort of full of shiny things that you want to, that you're distracted by, and so I think one of the things with this work is that it does involve getting out into nature, and it does involve getting away from all of the nonsense. And once you start to realize that actually I find much more value in being in a forest in the middle of nowhere than I do, you know, in a pub in Brno drinking my 5th pint of beer, then that's when the switch starts to happen, I think.
But it's more than that, Gary, because you see, I know your background's a bit of geology like me, and I know how much we love maps
Yeah.
and finding places. And we even talked a little earlier about running, but I mean, one of the things I liked when I was young was orienteering,
Yeah.
because you had a target to find.
Yeah.
So you never knew what you were going to come across. And with dowsing in the forest like you're doing, you know, you, as you said, you're coming across a well, an unexpected stone or something
Yeah.
like that. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's an excitement as you never quite know what you're going to find. And
Well,
that,
it's definitely true because a couple of weekends ago I was out in the forest with Eva, and we were dowsing, doing a walk, and she just takes her sticks out every now and then when she feels like there might be something there, and I've constantly got one in my hand wherever I go, and I'm constantly saying, oh, well, stop a minute, I've got to map this, got to map this. And she just laughed and said, you know, for me, it's like I'm just here to for the energies and you know, the spiritual side. But you've got to just map everything in great detail. I said, I'm sorry, I can't help myself.
yes.
I can't help
Uh,
myself. And I showed her on numerous occasions. Look, the line, we found it here and we found it here. There's a 10-kilometer gap through that forest, and at the moment it shows a straight line on my maps, right? And we go on the walk, and I said, "Look, see, it did an S bend, completely unexpected S bend."
it's, no, I find that fascination as well. I mean, and you're I refuse to use any kind of sat navs at all. I hate that. Don't want to know. I get my map out. I want to know where I am. I want to sense it, and I can look around. But these days I do a lot of remote work now. I can't
Yeah,
physically get out or everywhere, obviously, to different parts of the world. So what I find is, apart from the reveal that you get when you're physically out in the field, and I, as you know, I spent 6 years mapping North Wiltshire.
Yeah.
and following the lines, and I came across several stone circles which didn't exist anymore, but you can still see the huge sarsens in the side of the road or the side of the hedge, you know.
Yeah.
So there was always a bit of a joy with that. But now doing the remote work, you still get that reveal, which is you still get that excitement because if you're following a particular line and you're tracking it, and you talked about earlier about the connection with the lines actually prompting you to find things out. I'll get a phone call or an email from someone who's saying, you know, I live here. Can you tell me anything about this place? And I've just tracked the line through it, you know. There's a timing to it which is just unbelievably beautiful, and sometimes they'll point out a place on the line that you hadn't picked up. All right.
Yeah.
And you'll see that the place they're talking about maybe an old passage tomb or something which you'd not picked up, and yeah, sure enough, the lines will go through it. So there's still that element of discovery which is wonderful.
Yeah, well, I keep thinking to myself, I should learn how to do the remote work as well because I got too much ground to cover.
Well, it's easy because you've already reached that sensitivity with those frequencies of the lines. It's now just a question of just getting the map out and
Yeah,
starting to look.
I need
Get
to
on,
give it a shot.
get on Google Earth and what I would suggest is you put pins in to all the interesting areas, like where the churches are, where the hills are, where the wells are. So you've got a map of Google Earth. You can see the topography, so put the peaks in as well. So when you actually put it up on out of 3D, for instance, you'll look at it and you maybe got about 20 pins there, or 10 pins in that particular area. Well, just put them on the ground as pennies, space it out. That's what I do. I just literally put the maps. I look at the pennies on the ground, and it's exactly mirroring the same geometry shape of the 10 pieces that I've got there. And I've got 10 of them, and I'm thinking, well, I really haven't got a clue which ones where the line's going to run through. And that's the really beautiful thing about it. If I just put one here, one here, one here, it's pretty obvious. But as soon as I'm going into that point where I'm thinking it's obvious where the line goes, I'm destroying the exercise because I need
Yeah,
to get out of my head. I need to get no conscious involvement in this.
yeah,
In this, so I'm left there. Literally, I know when I got to the right point because I say to myself, I really haven't got a clue. It could be bloody anywhere. Then I don't care either anymore. I just don't care. Just show me where it is. At that point, I'm then walking across the carpet and boom, really? And then you think, what? And you go back again and check it again. Okay, so it's there. And you find, for instance, where the line or two lines you're following is amongst all these 10 markers. And you go back on the map and you zoom in a bit and you find, so it's going in this area. Oh, look, those two are crossing over there and this sort of greenish bit, you know? So you zoom in more and you do the exercise again a couple more times. And finally, you find where the node is. And then you zoom in that final bit. You know, where is it on the ground? And I've lost count of the number of times I've done this, but I'll tell you one example. I was asked to find a site in Iceland, and the only place that it looked like there was a Type 4 alignment running through was in the southwest corner, well south of Reykjavik, south of the Blue Lagoon, and it ran through this tiny little fishing village called Grindavik. And I thought, you know, there's nothing in there showing anything indication, but the lines came together in a fifth order node in the middle of this fishing village. I'm thinking, this is nuts. And I'm looking on Google Earth and I can see nothing at all. I'm down to the street map now and I'm actually plotting it on this. And finally, I thought, right, I'm going to go onto the street map, street view, to see what the hell's there. That was the only chance of seeing anything. And there it was, this old stone circle, Viking temple, just off the side of the road, stone cairn, and I'm thinking, I can't believe this. And then I Google it, nothing's coming up at all about this site, anywhere. And yet I'm led to it, which is lovely. That actually was the same line, probably enough, that runs down through the Orkneys, through Skara through the Ring of Brodka, Stones of Stines. It runs down through Germany. I told you about this, through the Sun Temple, not far from what was it, Leipzig or something like that, but Hanover, not far from Hanover, down into Czechia, which is one of the lines that you picked up.
Cool.
And that, so yes,
It goes all the way to Iceland. Which one is it? You'd have to look at my map.
yeah, no, yeah, but it's for me, it's one of the most significant Type 4 alignments ever. And because it runs down through an island called Paphos in Greece, where St. John had his revelations in a vision in a cave. It runs through the pyramid at Giza, down through Debre Basin in Ethiopia, where there's a monastery at the top of the mountain. And talking about the bizarre things was that I was asked to do, about 3 years ago, I was asked to do some training over in California. And I had to find a node nearby to take them to, and we not far from the middle of nowhere, but there we found the node, and that too I found later was on this same line.
Wow.
And the Yorkshire's had something special to me because I was taken there when I was 14-year-old by my grandmother, so I knew the places back then, and that's another thing which is helpful. If you've been somewhere before in your past, even in your youth, your body has a connection to that place. So if you're thinking about dowsing an area that you've been to or you've been to in your geological life, you'll be that much more sensitive to the energies in that area too.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, I mean, there are other strange things like coming across a stone circle that had been constructed in the last 12 years, and it was on a crossing of two 90 pace wide lines as well, some distance north of Brno. And the second time we went to visit it, to film it and make some video, there were three ladies there. So they were obviously paying homage of some form. So we kind of kept our distance. But as they left and we arrived, we started talking to them. It turned out that it was one of their husbands had constructed the stone circle. So the question was, well, why here? Because he liked the place.
Well, he sensed it, didn't he?
Yeah.
And that's why people buy houses. They have a feel for the place.
Yeah.
But I found something similar in Anglesey. There's a very powerful line that runs through Brinkechlidu, and I probably didn't pronounce that right, and through Bringwyn, and it goes up through to Rosebery Topping in Yorkshire. But just beyond Brinkechlidu, there's a town called Beaumaris with a castle. And right next to the beach, there's a modern stone circle. And the line runs straight through the middle of that. The node's there too.
Yeah, cool.
So whoever built that stone circle must have had a connection.
Must have.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, I started out with all these small lines and looking at Slavic archaeological sites and discovered that the lines run down the church aisles in every instance. And there's one very famous archaeological site where there are 10 churches, and every single, and they're all, if you looked at an aerial photograph, you'd see that the churches are kind of like splayed out in like an arc, and each one of them has a line going down it. So there's actual numerous lines all going through this site, and you have to think to yourself, and every single Slavic site I've ever been to is exactly that. There's a line going through every church. Sometimes two, sometimes more, but there's always one going down the aisle. And you just have to ask yourself, well, how did they site those churches? And what unfortunately, in this part of the world, there's not much written history. So like the Anglo-Saxons, at least they kept some records, but the Slavs didn't. And, you know, they're kind of at the same time. So you really have no insight into that culture other than archaeological. And of course, you know, archaeologists would look at me like I was a lunatic. Although I went to the museum in one of the towns here, and they built the museum around a dig of a Slavic church. And they caught me walking through the museum. And I said to the archaeologist, I said, look, I know you probably don't accept this, but there is an energy line running straight down the aisle of this church, And every single place I've ever been where there's a Slavic church, it's the same. And he actually suggested I write a paper. I might try it actually, just to see what the reaction would be. But
Well,
they definitely knew. They definitely knew.
it's good you have Eva with you in a way, because I suspect that if you go to these small towns and villages, there may be legends that they know, stories that they know
Yeah,
that may contain clues, especially stories of things like great serpents
yeah,
and fights and that kind of thing, because
yeah.
that might tell you more. But yeah,
Well, Googling is a lot of fun because you can Google so much in English and then you have to try to put in some Czech words and then, use Google Translate and see what you've got. And I do sometimes come across some interesting content that obviously nobody else is interested in. So I've a few Czech friends who are just like, well, you know more about my country than I do. And I take them all these places, like, did you know there was a stone circle by Valorant? No, well, let's go. And I take them there and, wow, good Lord, I never knew this place existed.
yes, yes. Oh.
So I've had a lot of fun with it. I continue. I'm maybe a little bit obsessive, is my problem. I'm that I'm determined to map these things as best I can and to leave some kind of a record of it. And
Well, you're doing great. I think you're spoilt for choice with regards to so many sites you have over there as well. So that can't be easy to, because I get distracted by the buildings as well, because they all. I know you did some videos on one place with incredible Templar
yeah,
symbols on the wall,
yeah,
and so that would completely distract me because I'd want to understand them more.
yeah. No, kept us busy for a while. Absolutely. Yeah, it's good. It's good and interesting stuff, and there's a purpose to it because we do at winter solstice. We went to one of them by Brno, and we did our meditation there, and yeah, it was a good experience. And like I say, it gets me out in the country, gets me into the fresh air, gets me some exercise. Well, can't be bad. So I'd just like to encourage more people to do it. And I think that the problem I have here is because I'm not Czech and everything I write is in English, it's kind of opaque to the Czechs unless they know me, which
Yeah,
is something I need to figure a way around eventually.
yeah. Yeah, I think if you ever do write a book on everything there, you'll need to get a Czech
Czech translation or
translation. Yeah,
something. Yeah.
there's something which I'm beginning to notice, which you've picked up on as well. But when we do our meditations, and other groups are reporting, when they report, but they just tell me about what happens during their meditation. There's an increasing a form of resonance or union with nature, that like birds or animals. I mean, we've had some extraordinary times when in the Stanton Drew Stone Circle, a couple of times when there was about 90 of us in meditation, and on these two occasions, after the first meditation, we were surrounded by the cows. Some of them would just lie down on the ground next to us and just join in. And I've others who talk about wild horses who join them in through the mists and midday at the circle. And I know you've found butterflies at the node.
Butterflies. We also often find horses or stud farms and things in those sort of places, and also even cows in fields when you're looking for the line, and then you find it and you turn around and all the cows are actually in the line. They're laying down because it's about to rain or whatever. And I've noticed that several times. And in fact, some old guy that I bumped into here, he said, well, that's how he told me one day. It was when I was in the summer, I was on my own. So my understanding of Czech wasn't so wonderful, but I did get what he was saying. He was saying the old people used to use where the animals sat all the time to determine where the lines went to some extent.
There's a connection. The sort of feedback that I'm hearing is that it's the animals are trying to help us actually, rather than the other way around, and they follow they come to us when we're doing something right. So coming back to getting other people interested, that could be a way to come and do meditation and prayer together in these groups at these times and watch what happens, because that sets people alive. They think, wow, something's really going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is just, and this was Eva's suggestion, just to organise some hiking trips and just pull out the rods and what you're doing. Look, I'm going to show you some energy lines.
Well, bring enough for them.
Yeah, I'll have to make some from coat hangers or something. I mean, I remember last time we talked, you said you only use one rod, and now I only use one rod as well. I don't need two; just one's enough. I can do everything with one rod now.
Yeah.
So they're definitely, practice does. The more you do it, the more things become apparent on how you can use the rods and work with the lines as well. So
did I tell you what happened when I had a group of practicing shamans come over from the Maine area, Boston area, and they asked me, the lady who brought them over to do various things and go to various sites in the UK, asked me to teach them in Bath and then to take them to Stanton Drew in the afternoon. And in my first dowsing courses, I normally train people to pick up 4 different types of lines. I teach them to use the rods and all that. Within an hour, none of them were using rods anymore. They were sensing the different frequencies in different parts of their body and assigning actual colors and intensities and types of feelings to them. So they could walk into an area, switch their awareness on and think, pink throat, that's a type 2, or blue, I can feel it right in my solar plexus here. That must be that. And the interesting thing was they'd all have their own way.
Yeah,
it's just another set of symbols or picking things up. And so again, the universe has a strange way of teaching. I was in Knocknaria near Sligo, where there's loads of stone circles at Carrymore, and I was going to go up Maeve's Cairn, and I had my one rod with me. And just as I was about to use it, I dropped it on the grass. Didn't mean to. I knew it was in an area of about two square meters, something like that. Could I find it? No, not a chance. It had just completely disappeared.
Oh, good grief.
So I then had to start finding another way of connecting. So it's like there'll be a time when you're looking for your rod, you'll find it's gone. It kind of forces you to progress into, okay, well, I have to find another way of sensing them.
Great stuff. So let's wrap this one up and with just some information about where people can find more information about you and what you're doing again.
Well, thanks. Yeah, look, my website's roryduff.com. Do go along there. There's plenty of newsletters there, which are free to download, PDFs, books. All my books are on there. There's 2 Grail books and from Dowsing books. So, that'd be great if you buy that. And if you want to head over to the sacrednetwork.org, it's a platform for spiritually minded people. The main idea is to get people to meditate in groups on sacred sites near to where they are. And the main reason for that is because I think we're going through an evolution of consciousness and a move from individual to group consciousness. All the prophecies talk about this, and we just need to prepare. And meditation on these sites seems to be the way we need to start. So, and some extraordinary things are happening right now. People are awakening, and they're finding this is not just enjoyable, but more things are happening. Like more synchronicities. We haven't really touched on that, but synchronicity is just, for some people, it's just going off the scale.